The reward for beating the Rangers, an excellent team on the road, is now to have to go against another tough team on the road in New Jersey, coming away with 2 points against a desperate team. We'll find out how the Jets can pull it off on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Obviously, tonight's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Jets game coming up against the New Jersey Devils tomorrow. Big game for the Jets, in part because, unfortunately, despite having had a really nice, outing against the Rangers, the Jets are probably doing some scoreboard watching and realizing that they're not getting a lot of help. A lot of their opponents continue to rack up wins. Unfortunately, the Avs won yesterday, and it looks like the Stars are going to beat the Yotes. So just not really a lot of margin for error, especially if your goal is to win the Central Division. But that's the road the Jets have chosen. They are certainly, one of those teams that really doesn't give up a ton of points. So they just have to keep pace, keep things in perspective, keep rolling. And, this resurgent Devils team, it's going to be a tough one, right? Winnipeg has, they've got a good performance against the Rangers in their back pocket now after two thumpings of some below playoff caliber teams. But now, the road from here only gets more challenging, and the Jets really need to ride the confidence and fundamentals that they've been building on into something a little bit more consistent so that, instead of alternating good games and bad games against quality teams, they can just at least deliver competitive performances. Before we dive into how the Devils are going to line up and what we might see from Winnipeg, just wanted to let you know tonight's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, the Devils have recently been a little bit resurgent, but not necessarily in the record. I think a couple of players have started to look a little bit better under Travis Green, but overall, right, the same problems that have plagued this team all year continue to haunt them. Goaltending has been a bit of a tough one. Consistency has been an issue. It sounds like some of their top stars haven't exactly been 100% healthy this year, even when they've been back supposedly healthy. We've seen that with some of Winnipeg's players, so we're all kind of used to it. We get it. It's the grind. But in terms of what New Jersey's going to roll out, we're currently looking at Timo Meier, Nico Hischier, and Jesper Bratt. Second line, Hughes, Haula, and Holtz. This is interesting to see Holtz on the second line because, the past, I would say, a season or so, he's kind of been in Lindy Ruff's doghouse. So maybe Holtz will finally start to put two and two together at the NHL level. I don't know how much of it is necessarily his fault, how much of it is the coaching staff maybe not trusting him enough. It'll be interesting to see if he really thrives because he was such a heralded prospect. And for this Devils team, they're really pushing forward with this young core. And if Holtz can start to really turn into that amazing high-end goal scorer that he was promised to be, he might truly turn this team from being a really dangerous threat to being one of the deepest forward groups in the whole league because his talent is undeniable. The skill is there. It's just getting it to work at the NHL level that may be a little bit of a challenge, or at least for the time being. Third line, you've got Palat, Nosek, and Mercer. This line is probably pretty scary because Mercer is very good. Palat's experienced. And Nosek, he's been around the block a bit. He's not exactly a guy that Lowry will necessarily worry about if he gets matched up against him. But Mercer, definitely one of the danger men on this team. He's had a pretty productive season, and Winnipeg really should be careful around him, especially if they start putting out some of their depth forwards to eat up these minutes. Fourth line, I don't think you're going to really expect too much from. Curtis McDermott, Chris Tierney, and Curtis Lazar. Probably going to be asked to play minimal minutes and be more in a shutdown sort of defensive role. I think Winnipeg's bottom six can handle this. The Jets should be able to handle the softer matchups, but it's the top matchups where I think we're going to see Winnipeg really face the toughest test. This first line and to a lesser extent the second line, both are going to be tough outs, and I think the Jets are really going to have to be on their best behavior. I'm curious to know what happens with the second line with Monahan, Ehlers, and Toffoli. We'll have to see how they match up, because against the Rangers they were good and productive, but they didn't end up getting on the score sheet too much. So it'll be interesting to see if Toffoli maybe cracks the net, against his old team. I'm sure he'd love to put one past some of his old teammates. But for the Jets, just finding a way to win is the most important thing right now. Focus on the process and, worry about the rest later. Now, in terms of how the Jets have lined up, there was one change at practice. We saw Colin Miller slide into Neil Pionk's spot. Haven't really seen a lot about Pionk since then. Don't know if something happened with him or if he's just maybe taking a maintenance day. But in terms of what the Jets lineup is currently rolling with, not a lot else. Pionk was apparently a little bit under the weather, which is not too surprising. But if Miller is coming in for Pionk, it wouldn't be shocking. Apparently, there are some potentially other surprise changes. Mike McIntyre suggested that some guys may rotate in to keep guys fresh. That'll be interesting. I don't know if Stanley's going to draw back in. So we'll have to see, right? I think for the most part, I'm going to expect or at least hope for minimal changes. I think the lineup that the Jets had against the Rangers worked pretty well, and I don't know that you necessarily need to change too much. And there's not really many guys that I would bench. Perfetti, though, might be a name that I would circle as a guy who could potentially draw in, maybe for Gustafsson. You slide Nemesnikov back under center and roll that Barron, Nemesnikov, and Perfetti line like they did earlier. That could be one change. In terms of other guys, maybe Kupari gets a game here. I can't imagine that he'd be the first one who gets promoted, but maybe he does. Otherwise, I think the Jets are probably going to keep things pretty similar. I'm curious to know if Connor, Scheifele, and Iafallo can continue their good performance. So far, it's been good. The question is, can it continue? I don't know. Based on what we saw with Scheifele kind of putting on the big boy pants in the last few games, maybe that's what's going to carry this trio. Because if Scheifele is the one doing a lot of the heavy lifting, it might be enough. But we'll see. As long as Iafallo can kind of keep pace and be a solid defensive presence and a play facilitator, I'm not really going to be too upset. I just want to see them sustain that level of success and do it against good opponents consistently, because we know that, in the past, these top-line trios sometimes have a good game here and there, and then the next game they fall off completely and it's back to square one. But if Iafallo really does stick up there and it actually works consistently, that'd be a huge relief for all of us, I would say, probably for the coaching staff too. Finding somebody who can help Connor and Scheifele work together has probably been, one of their biggest struggles. And, obviously it really doesn't need to be, but they've kind of forced themselves to try and fit what Scheifele is interested in and looking for. So now it's kind of on this line trio to actually gel together and make it work. And so far, early returns do look pretty good. So cross your fingers that it continues and that you solve one big Jets lineup question. Now, there was another question that actually popped up, and it was one that no one was really asking, but all of a sudden, Alex Adam, who does, some really great podcasting, Behind the Play. He's on CBC and a few others. He was interviewing Scott Wheeler from The Athletic, and apparently there's a suggestion that Rucker McGroarty might not leave college this at the end of the season. And we'll talk about what that means for the Jets, whether it really makes sense for Rucker to stay for one more year at the NCAA level, and how that could impact Winnipeg's present playoff plans as they try for probably one of their biggest runs in recent memory. We'll get into that all in just a moment, but before we go any further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts guaranteed to fit your ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure your part fits your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just checking in on some storylines around the Jets ahead of their game against the Devils. Obviously, they had a big game against the Rangers yesterday, massive win. Everyone's excited. But, there's been one little piece of news that was maybe slightly less exciting. Like I just mentioned before, Alex Adams from Behind the Play was interviewing with Scott Wheeler the other day, and it came out that Rucker McGroarty might be staying at Michigan for one more season. We'll talk about that in just a moment and what it means for the Jets' plans. But before we get to that, just wanted to let you know something really cool. Obviously, for a lot of you Locked On fans, you probably have heard about Locked On Sports Today, our 24/7 streaming channel. For those of you who are interested, though, and especially for you baseball fans, obviously we are running an MLB season preview series right now. It's been ongoing today, and if you're interested in tuning in, be sure to check it out right now. It's on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Now, like I said, Rucker McGroarty apparently from scouts and from folks who are around Michigan's locker rooms and roster. Apparently, everyone is starting to suggest that Rutger McGroarty may come back for another season at Michigan. And for the Jets, this is slightly inconvenient. I think this was probably not really something that they were anticipating as much, in part because, the expectation is Rucker would be trying for a national title. And if it doesn't happen this year, he'd perhaps still go pro anyways. I thought at least that was the plan. He would leave college at the end of this year, come to the Jets, and likely earn himself somewhere in the, a spot somewhere in the bottom six. Get your pro career rolling, sign that ELC, start making some cash, and the rest will sort of fall into place. But apparently, the plan may be to go back to Michigan for one more season. And honestly, I don't really know that that's, at least on a professional level, the best choice. In part because Rucker's kind of proven all that he can at the NCAA level, right? In terms of his development arc and trajectory, he's probably as pro-ready as any of Winnipeg's other prospects. So, for him to stay in college one more year wouldn't really benefit him necessarily in terms of his development, but on a personal level, this is probably where, his goals and personal ambitions play a factor, right? He might view this as really one of his last chances to get a title out of the NCAA, really just going for it one more time. And I can respect and understand that. I've heard from a family of a guy who went pro a couple years ago. He didn't exactly have the most successful pro career, and for him, it kind of came down to regretting having left college. Leaving all his friends, not getting a chance to play with them again. And it was one of those turning points in his life that he suggested that he regretted. So, in a lot of respects, I can understand why Rucker might not be eager to, turn away from Michigan and move to the Jets already. But, if he is kind of ready to take that next step, I think this is probably something he should do sooner rather than later. If you can kind of prove that you're ready to hang around with the big dogs, maybe even as soon as this playoff run, it gives the Jets extra, forward insurance for injuries. It gives them another versatile weapon. Rucker has, some really natural scoring instincts. Obviously, we don't know what he's like at the pro level yet because he's still pretty raw and he's only played against collegiate level players. But perhaps, his time at the dev camps and stuff has given him at least some idea of what to expect at the pro level. So, for me, it does suck. It's unfortunate, and I really wish that he'd be leaning more towards joining Winnipeg. And there's, of course, still time for him to change his mind. It's definitely not set in stone. It's not like he's, committed to coming back to Michigan for one more season. But so far, the signs seem to be pointing that way. And if you're Winnipeg, you're probably trying to ask him if, he might reconsider that decision, make the ELC offer, get him signed, and add him to the roster for what could be Winnipeg's best chance at a cup run for the next couple of seasons. So, for me, it's just, it is a little bit disappointing, but like I said, I can understand from his perspective why he might not be as eager to turn pro as we are for him to do so. Now, in terms of what this will mean for Winnipeg, obviously McGroarty was likely going to be on the third or fourth line. I don't know that he'd really supplant anyone immediately unless we're talking maybe like a Barron or a Perfetti or something, maybe a Gustafson or Kupari. I think that's sort of where the Jets would probably line him up first, unless he really kicks it off and immediately starts scoring rapidly and earns a quick promotion. I don't think we'd actually see that from him. I suspect it'd probably be a bit of a learning curve for the first few games, kind of getting his feet wet and seeing if he's capable of, hanging and skating at the pro levels. And then he would probably sit some time, and only really rotate in a couple of games here and there during the final stretch of the season and maybe even early in the playoffs. But I can't imagine that he'd really play that pivotal of a role, maybe 9 to 10 minutes a night, if that, and then probably just be a rotational option to rest some guys or help if somebody's ailing physically. So in terms of how it impacts the playoff run this year, perhaps not as big of a deal. I was kind of hoping he'd be like an internal rental. Sounds like that may not be the case, which is, again, slightly unfortunate, but, nothing you can really do about that. If Rucker wants to go back to college, who are we to say don't do that? It's up to him. It's his choice. And, whether he does so or not, the Jets still have a pretty strong team with or without him heading into the postseason. So either way, he'll make the right choice for himself. And, I'm just hoping that at the end of the day, his pro career begins in the near future because he's got a lot of talent. But the only way that he's really going to reach that level and cross that threshold is if he starts getting pro minutes sooner rather than later. The more he pushes it off, the older he gets. And, that potential that he has may start to slide a bit. But, that's not the case for everyone. And with the skill ceiling at the NHL level at an all-time high, maybe one more year in college wouldn't end up being the worst thing. So we'll see how it pans out. But at least for the time being, the Jets are probably going to be okay either way. I'm sure they'd love to have him under contract and get him playing some pro games, either with the Jets or with the Moose. But in the meantime, they have got bigger fish to fry and get through. One of those fish to fry is trying to figure out where to put Gabriel Vilardi once he returns from injury. It sounds like there are some suggestions it's going to be before the playoffs. Not really a lot known about his current status. There's just rumors at this point. And with an enlarged spleen, who's to say what the timetable for return is? I would be surprised if he misses, the whole regular season and playoffs. My guess is he might have maybe a later playoff start, but if he does come back before the end of the year, I think that'd be, happiest for everyone. Get him back playing some games, get him warmed up a bit, and then roll him into the playoff run as the Jets prepare for, again, what is hopefully their deepest run in many years. But before we talk about where Vilardi might slot in and what the Jets should do with him as they try and get him back up to speed, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Game Time. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are probably, old hats at dealing with frustrations, whether it's surprise charges, service fees, and all sorts of other odds and ends. A lot of you probably also hate that when you buy tickets, sometimes you're not even sure what the view is like, right? You can see a seat on a map, but how do you know what it's actually going to be like without being in the venue? Game Time totally knows that frustration and offers you in-venue seat views so that when you're spending however much you're paying for big tickets, you'll actually get the view you pay for, right? They don't want you to go in blind and unhappy with your seat. They want to make sure that you enjoy your time. And to do so, they also offer killer last-minute tickets, lowest prices, and flash sales so that you're saving time and money and taking away a lot of the mystery surrounding those next Winnipeg Jets tickets, that next concert ticket, whatever you're interested in. They've got a great marketplace, and it's super easy and convenient to get started. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. The terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up really quickly with some thoughts for the Jets and really, the return of Gabriel Vilardi, which at this point doesn't seem like it's imminent, but should be somewhere in the near future. Obviously, Vilardi is a really big, important part of this team's, power play and even strength play, probably more so on the power play recently than the 5v5 play. But if he's on the right line, obviously he can really sparkle and be not only a massive net front presence, but somebody whose sheer offensive zone skill and talent has really been a threat in multiple spaces, especially if he's got somebody feeding him into those half wall areas. So for Vilardi, right, we're seeing a couple of different options for line combos. Now, I think the one that we can rule off immediately is the first line. And it's the one that I'm most worried that he'll go back on because obviously Iafallo has sort of bounced up and down the lineup. And my guess is that the Jets view Vilardi as like a top 6 player, right? So top line would be a mistake. Connor, Scheifele, and Vilardi do not work well together. I can't imagine that getting Vilardi back, in some state, whether it's fully healthy or, even 70 to 80%, having him try and work the same magic that Iafallo is currently doing probably isn't replicable, especially because Vilardi is also a slower skater. He's not nearly as swift in the corners as Iafallo is, and he doesn't really play the same style. So, at least technique-wise, I just think that there's not really a lot of chemistry in that unit, and I can't imagine that it would work much better than what we're seeing now. Second line, I'm also kind of loath to really change that. I think, the trio of Ehlers, Monahan, and Toffoli so far looks pretty decent. The only thing that I would say that has kind of been a little bit hit or miss, honestly, it's Monahan on that line. And I say this as a very much enjoyer of Monahan's hockey. I think he's been a great fit for the Jets. I just think with Toffoli being a bit on the slower side and Monahan being even slower at times, it's been a little bit challenging for Ehlers to make those zone entries like he usually likes to. Having two guys who are behind the play on a pretty consistent basis, I think is, harder for him to time those entries correctly. And you've seen some offsides because, again, it takes Toffoli and Monahan a little bit more time to get up the ice. And a lot of Ehlers' offense is based off of rush chances and a lot of rapid transition and space creation. So, some thought there. But again, it's not enough to where it's not really working. So, like I said, I'm loath to change it if it continues to look pretty darn good. Now, the third line is where I think you might have a legitimate shot of finding a good spot for Vilardi. I wouldn't mind seeing what Niederreiter, Lowry, and Gabriel can do together. Now, the other part of me is kind of like, you don't want to break up a thing that works really well. But the other part of me says, well, that line works well, but they don't score as much as they probably should. Because if we're being honest, Lowry at times has gotten like second line minutes in some of these games, but he and his line mates don't really produce at that level. So if you find a really elite finisher that can punch goals in and actually make use of the space making and forechecking that Lowry and Niederreiter both do, it might be a bit of a beneficial boost, because as much as Appleton has done a decent job of keeping up and offered a decent defensive presence, the thing that he struggles with is, that offensive side of his game. He'll have some moments where he has some nice goals and he can be, an opportunistic poacher at times, but in other moments, you'll see the play kind of die on the stick in the offensive zone. And I think that's where Vilardi might be a bit of a better fit and be able to make use of those low slot chances that Lowry seems to just create in volume. And obviously, Vilardi's never going on the fourth line, so we can probably cross that off already. What I'll say is, it is nice to have all these options and choices. The Jets could probably configure their lines in almost any way, and so long as they don't reunite Connor Scheifele and Vilardi, I think most of their combos should at least be break-even or halfway decent. Perhaps even better if, things pan out the right way. But for Vilardi's return, the Jets, for once, will have a pretty tough decision with a clear top 6 forward and a top 6 that's already looking pretty tasty. But perhaps things will change over the next few weeks. Maybe the top 6 starts to slow down. Maybe they don't cook as much. And suddenly there's a real need to re-examine what your combos are. But that's, all in due time. For now, the Jets are in a pretty good spot. And I think for me, if the Jets continue to roll the way that they are against these quality opponents, don't worry about changing it too much. Vilardi, just make sure that he's healthy and ready to go towards the playoffs. If you need to shut him down for the rest of the regular season and Winnipeg continues to play like the way that they've played against the Rangers, you don't maybe have to worry about it as much, and you can just kind of let him recuperate, get healthier, and welcome him back once the postseason starts. At that point, the lineup may look different again anyway. So we'll see how it goes. Arniel at the helm again should be interesting. The first run was really good, and I'm curious to know what players he'll want to bring back into the lineup for the Devils game. It might give us some hints about how he sees this team heading into the postseason, because with Bones sidelined for an undisclosed amount of time, Arniel might be the guy at the helm. We'll see. We'll just have to get, play it by ear, give it some time and see what he comes up with. But, I'm feeling pretty good about it, right? I'm pretty happy with how the Jets played against the Rangers. I think Winnipeg can easily replicate a good performance against the Devils. It's just, putting paper into action, and that's where the Jets can really make some hay. So cross your fingers for a big game tomorrow. We'll see what line combos the Jets roll out and if they make any major changes. Hoping for gold stars, and that I get to report on Thursday, or I guess on Friday, about a big Winnipeg Jets win. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with a recap of Winnipeg versus New Jersey and maybe some preview coverage of their game against the Islanders. But like I said, that's all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.